Thank you so much, Minister Zafrul, for being with us. I want to start with just what your main takeaway is so far at this particular gathering.
Right. Well, first of all, thank you, Lisa, for having me. Well, the main takeaway today, of course, we're here, the APEC CEO Summit, and this morning I was at the APEC ministerial meeting. The main takeaway is talking about how the APEC member economies should try and work harder together, deepen the relationship when it comes to investment and trade. Talk about integration, talk about multilateralism. Of course, there are concerns about where certain economies are heading, but at the end of the day, I think we want to make sure that member economies continues to grow in terms of their economy, but a growth that is inclusive, a growth that is sustainable, a growth that is resilient as well. So these are areas where we talked about. Even this morning we talked about how important SMEs are, micro SMEs, women entrepreneurs, youth entrepreneurs within the APEC economies to ensure that the growth that we've seen so far in many countries is a growth that is more inclusive.
You talk about concerns among certain economies. How much is that centered in the United States with the election of Donald Trump?
Yeah, there have been many discussions on the sidelines on that. Of course, it's still too early to say. We are still waiting for the administration to come into place. I think that's the 20th of January. But there are already concerns about whether there will be more tariffs, for example, right? And if you look at the APEC economies, it is US and China plays a major role in a global economy. Even if you look at the APEC economies, 3 billion people, 30% of the global population. If you look at the GDP of all the APEC member economies, it's 60% of GDP, 50% of trade. And both US and China plays a critical role in ensuring that to see growth in trade and investments, you need to ensure that the integration when it comes to trade between member economies continue to grow.
There's a sense, at least in markets in the United States, that if the U.S. were to implement tariffs, that it would hurt the rest of the world more than it would hurt the U.S. What has struck me at being here is that other countries are not waiting around to see. How much do you get that sense as well from other people? Is that the concern that other people have as well?
Well, we had meetings with companies here as well. Of course, the APEC member economies, many companies are present here today at this summit. We did discuss about what are their concerns, and definitely one of the concerns is on trade tensions because these affect them. And so I asked, what are we going to do about it? What are you going to do about it as companies? So they are looking at realigning their supply chain, they're redesigning their supply chain to make their supply chain more resilient, more secure. Of course, as businesses, they want to make sure that it's commercially viable as well. So there are pros and cons. In the short term, we, especially Malaysia or us in ASEAN, in Southeast Asia, we are seeing flows coming into our region. We are very much friendly to all nations, and companies are looking at neutral areas and countries with many FTAs as well, and not wait, like you said, right? And actually, to be fair, this discussion is consistent even before the US elections, because we're already seeing the escalation of that.
Well, there's this question about China's presence and whether China is increasing its presence in a number of countries because there's an opening right now. It certainly feels that way here in the sense that China is very present here, and I don't feel the same kind of presence from the United States. Is that true in flows as well?
Well, I think, to be fair, I've seen even in the CEO Summit here, many US companies, Google's here, Microsoft's here. In fact, our Prime Minister is on a panel with with 2 US companies and 1 China company from China. So I don't think that's a fair assessment. But having said that, that's on the company side. But on the policymaker side and on the government side, we do feel a lot of more engagement now with many parties, including China. Of course, China is a very important part of the economy, global trade as well. And for the region, for ASEAN, Malaysia takes the championship of ASEAN next year. China is our largest trading partner. So therefore, it's not surprising to see strong involvement of Chinese companies and the presence of Chinese here in APEC, in Peru.
Do you feel like the tensions between the U.S. and China have actually been beneficial for Malaysia, or have been an issue or a bit of both?
Well, in the short term, I must admit, there is a window where companies are, as I said, re-looking at their supply chain, right? Because of the trade tension between China and the US, many American companies, European companies, Asian companies based in China is relocating, or when they talk about expansion, they're looking at new locations for that. And ASEAN being a very neutral region, and Malaysia, of course, in that, have seen a net FDI inflow against a backdrop of an FDI going down globally. So yes, the short answer is we are seeing increase in investments from many companies from different countries. But in the longer term, I think it is going to be a concern, regardless of what the companies say, when relocating will not resolve the problem. And you said that what will this be? What will the impact be? I think the impact will be, of course, for global economies, we're going to see slower growth, and we're already, IMF World Bank is already forecasting that. Even APEC economies are forecasting a slower growth because of this. But at the end of the day, it's the consumers, to me. The consumers may, like you said, end up paying higher prices for the same goods, and I'm not sure whether that is going to be good as well for the consumers.